There's a version of the American dream that we've been sold on our entire lives. Work hard, learn a trade, show up, play the long game, and eventually you'll make it. That's exactly the life Chris Broomfield lived. For 35 years, he built custom homes for a living, the kind with million-dollar views and handcrafted details. But none of them were his. And somehow, after decades of building other people's dreams, he was still living paycheck to paycheck, with no assets, no equity, and worst of all, nothing he could pass down to his kids. Nothing that made him a single dollar unless he was physically there with a hammer in his hand. So he decided to take a risk on himself and bought 5 acres of land in rural New York so he could finally build something of his own. A single A-frame cabin, with no investors and no real estate experience to speak of. And at the time, he had no idea what it would become. Today, that same property generates $680,000 and is quietly becoming a multi-million-dollar hospitality brand that he could one day sell for millions. So what did a carpenter understand about building wealth that most real estate investors completely miss? How did one $60 per night cabin turn into a 5-unit portfolio booked 3 years out? And what did Chris figure out about design, branding, and guest experience that most Airbnb hosts never even think about? Chris started out framing houses, then moved into trim work, and eventually landed in high-end millwork and cabinetry, doing installations in some of the most expensive homes in Connecticut. And while the pay was pretty decent, the incoming work was completely unpredictable.
Well, the trades are always feast or famine. The springtime, everybody wants to get stuff done. It comes to the holidays, nobody wants anybody in their house. So you're always struggling to get a certain job and make it last through the winter.
So after decades of that cycle, Chris started thinking about something that had nothing to do with money, and he started thinking about his legacy.
I needed to have something to hand down to my family, my kids. If they didn't have a job or if they're at school, they would always have some sort of income.
So he made a bold move. He bought land. 5 acres in a tiny town called Remsen, New York. Population around 3,000 people, right on the edge of the Adirondacks. Now, this was by no means a hot Airbnb market. It was the woods, cold winters, a general store across the street, and a lake down the road. That's it. And he picked up all 5 acres for $27,000.
I bought the property because it had lots of hills and valleys on it so that I could separate cabins and still create privacy. It was directly across the street from a general store, which was a huge bonus for guests to be able to get anything they want during their stay. It was across the street also from a lake or a reservoir. It's 10 miles long and a mile and a quarter wide.
He designed a simple A-frame, just a place where his family could come stay when they drove up from Connecticut. And instead of hiring it all out, he did what carpenters do, and he got to work. It cost him about $90,000 all in. Which sounds like a lot, until you find out that hiring a crew to do the same thing would have run closer to $160,000 to $170,000.
I'm cheap. I didn't want to spend the money. I didn't have the money to spend at the time. I had the skills, I had the time. It gave me an opportunity to go up to camp. I call it camp. Be me and build.
He didn't go into this thing with the goal of building a thriving short-term rental business. But what he didn't realize was that this one cabin, this one 750 square foot A-frame in a town that no one's ever heard of, was about to change everything. So the A-frame is built. The family's got their place to stay, and when they're not using it, Chris throws it on Airbnb. Just a listing, some photos, and a hope that someone would show up.
Thought it was just going to be extra income. I didn't understand enough about it to turn it into a legitimate business.
And one of the things that makes this cabin special is that it was born out of a compromise with his wife. See, Chris is the kind of guy who loves sleeping outside. Tent in the woods, coyotes in the distance, cold air and all that good stuff. But his wife?
My wife, she's not a camper, so this was a compromise. So I designed this bed that you lay on it, you hit a button, and the whole room slides outside. So now you're sleeping under the stars.
And that one feature became the thing that put evergreen cabins on the map. At that point, Chris had maybe 3,000 followers on Instagram, and he had no idea how to convert any of it into bookings.
I just was posting pictures. I didn't understand how to put links in there or, basically do anything at the time.
But he didn't need to, because Airbnb was doing the heavy lifting. The algorithm found him, started pushing his listing, and guests started booking. He ends up launching in July of 2015. And in the first 6 months of his listing, the A-frame brought in about $7,000. He started at $60 a night because he wasn't really sure if anyone would come and he didn't really know what he had. But the bookings kept coming, so he nudged the rate up, $70. then $80, then $100 a night. Then he realized, wait, people are actually paying for this. What happens if I go higher? And in year 2, he went from $7,000 to $70,000 in gross revenue. And in year 3, he was well on his way to $100,000 to $115,000 on a $90,000 build. And now on some nights, that same A-frame goes for $600, $700.
Cash on cash for the A-frame, I think it's like 110%. After 2 or 3 years, I started making about 100 to 115,000 a year.
Cash on cash return tells you how hard your money's working in any given year. And it's calculated by taking your annual net profit and dividing it by the total cash you invested. So to give you an easy example here, if your net profit was $20,000 and you invested $100,000, your cash on cash return would be at 20%. So let's run Chris's numbers. He put $90,000 into the A-frame. By year 3, he's pulling in between $100,000 to $115,000 in gross revenue. With expenses like utilities, taxes, cleaning, he's netting somewhere around $80,000 to $90,000 a year. So we'll go with the middle number here, $85,000 net profit divided by $90,000 invested. That's a cash on cash return of roughly 94%, which is so close to a full payback in year 1. Now for context, a strong cash on cash return in traditional real estate is considered anywhere from 8 to 12%. Chris is doing about 10 times that. And remember, he built about 90% of it himself. That's what compressed the build cost from $160,000 down to $90,000. And his carpenter skill set didn't just save him money, it completely transformed the return profile of the asset. And this is the part of the story where most people would stop. Call it a win and retire on $80,000 a year net profit from one cabin.
I knew that there was something there where I'm like, all right, if I do another cabin, I'm basically gonna retire. It didn't work out that way, but that's where my mind was, you know.
Hey, really fast, here's a part of the story people don't usually talk about. Building the cabin is the fun part, but once you go from one property to multiple units, this stops being a little side project and starts becoming a real hospitality business. Because you're now managing bookings across platforms, guest messages, cleaners, pricing, calendars, and if you try to do all of that manually, it gets overwhelming pretty fast. And that's why a lot of professional hosts like me use platforms like Guesty. Guesty gives you one place to manage everything. Your listings, messaging, calendars, and operations. But what I really like is how it helps you actually scale like a business. For example, they have tools that help you drive direct bookings, which means that you're not just relying on Airbnb and paying platform fees. As in, you can actually keep more of the revenue from every reservation. Guesty also offers damage protection, which is designed specifically for short-term rental hosts. It provides comprehensive coverage to help protect your property from guest damages, which becomes really important when you're investing serious money into unique builds and custom designs like Chris did. So when you go from one property to several, you're not just saving time, you're putting real systems in place to help protect and grow what you're building. So if you want to learn more about Guesty, I'll leave a link in the description down below for you. Legend has it that if you use said linkage, you might get a little something whenever you sign up for the platform, because I negotiated that. I was like, excuse me, Mr. Guesty, will you give my audience a sweet little discount? And they were like, yes, sir, but they have to click your link. If they don't click your link, they get nothing. And I said, you better lawyer up, pal. All right, back to you, Rob. Once you see what's possible, once you understand what a piece of land can actually do, it's pretty hard to stop at one. But Chris had a problem. His cabin was so booked, he had nowhere to stay. So he does what any reasonable person would do, and he decides to build another cabin. But this time he decides not to design it all by himself, and he brings in some consultants, his kids. And his kids said, treehouse.
I want my kids to know how to build stuff. And if we were building something that they came up with, I was thinking that they would be more inspired to, learn the trades and understand how a house is built.
So treehouse it is, but not just any treehouse. His first idea, a giant mirrored glass box, 1,200 square feet, 2 stories, the whole thing reflecting the forest around it, practically disappearing into the trees. But he gets the initial estimate and he changes his mind fast. He scales it back, keeps the size big enough for the whole family, but finds a different way to make it special. The cabin sits on one side of the ravine. So he asks his kids, how do we get over there? Do we build a road, a deck?
And they're like, I'll just put a cable bridge. So we ended up doing the cable bridge. It was kind of a process working with them on that. All these little ideas, they'd come up with the general idea and I'd kind of tweak it with my carpentry experience. From day one, I hired help on that. First day, we're taking down trees, and 13 weeks later, we're putting, decor in there and spoons in the drawers.
For context, a standard new construction home generally takes anywhere from 9 to 18 months months to build. Chris did it in 3, and total cost to build was $175,000. After launching, it starts at about $400 to $450 a night, figuring the cable bridge alone justifies the premium. And it books immediately. First year he did $90,000 to $95,000 in gross revenue. Year 2, $125,000 to $130,000. And then one of his guests checked in, had an amazing stay, pulled out her phone and posted a TikTok. And just like that, 7 million views in a week.
My phone blew up. It was just bookings, one after another for weeks. Every single date for both cabins, the A-frame and the treehouse, were booked solid for 3 years.
3 years, booked solid, both cabins. One TikTok posted by a guest who didn't even tag him correctly. And when that TikTok hit, Chris made a rookie mistake that would cost him thousands. In the short-term rental space, ADR stands for average daily rate. It's the average amount that you earn per night across your bookings. And it's one of the most powerful levers that you have as a short-term rental host. Most new hosts like Chris, when he started, underpriced. They're not sure what they have and they want the bookings, so they go low. And that's fine at the beginning because you need reviews. You need the algorithm to find you, and a lower price helps with that. But here's the mistake. Once demand picks up, once you've got the reviews, the ranking, plus the attention, you have to move your rates up. Because if you don't, you will leave an enormous amount of money on the table. When that TikTok hit and 7 million people saw evergreen cabins, bookings flooded in for both properties. 3 years of dates filling up in a matter of days. And he didn't raise his rates.
Which was silly of me. I should have done that immediately and I didn't. I got locked in for 3 years on the old pricing.
Now, to be fair, he was still making great money. But think about how much more he could have made if he had simply moved his rates up $50 or even $100 a night. Just that simple change on 2 properties over 3 years of bookings, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional revenue. But that realization didn't slow him down. If anything, that viral moment and 3 years of secured bookings just poured gas on the fire. By 2021, Chris had 2 cabins running, both booked out, both printing money. So he started building plans for his next builds. The 3rd build was called Birch Falls, and his 4th build, a treehouse. And with these new builds, he had 2 big problems that he needed to address out the gate. Problem number 1, the waterfalls. Beautiful, dynamic waterfalls cascading down the back of the property. Guests loved them, they photographed great, and they were a huge part of what made the treehouse special. But they were also a complete nightmare in the winter. They were freezing up, overflowing, and just ripping everything apart. Problem number 2, the deer situation.
My wife and I were staying in the treehouse, and we heard this huge thunk. It felt like a car. Turns out it was a deer that was seeing the reflection in the glass windows, and it just kept ramming the cabin.
For the treehouse, he built a pond out front to break the reflection. Deer problem solved. His solution to the waterfall problem was simple. Put it inside. Now the whole cabin, interior waterfall, and spa amenities came in at $165,000 all in. And Chris decides to just keep going. He follows it up with a container cabin. This one has a little bit of everything. The wall is framed with his daughter's cabin idea drawings from over the years. The slide out bed from the A-frame is back, and there's a sky bubble sitting on top of a hand-painted silo right next to it. And then finally, right next to that, he built a tiny house. Because after all of this, he needed somewhere to stay on his own property. Total build cost for both, $70,000. So that's 5 units in total. 5 acres, $27,000 of land, and here's what that same piece of land is projected to do in 2026. The A-frame, the one that started at $60 a night and nobody knew existed, this year it's projected to make $150,000 to $155,000 in gross revenue. The treehouse, brought to life by its kid's vision. It's projected to make anywhere from $160,000 to $165,000. Birch Falls, the spa cabin, projected to make $145,000 to $150,000. The container cabin, it only launched 4 months ago and it's already booked $70,000. In 2026, it's projected to do anywhere from $170,000 to $180,000. And then there's his tiny house, which he barely markets at all because it's his, it's where he wants to stay. Even with that small amount of marketing, he's on pace to do anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 this year in gross revenue. So the total projected gross revenue across all 5 units in 2026 comes out to approximately $680,000. Now let's talk about the expenses and what it actually costs to run this property. His mortgage note across the property comes out to about $2,400 a month. His taxes, $1,500 a month. Utilities and insurance, $3,000 a month. Full-time cleaners and full-time maintenance, about $14,000 a month. So his total monthly overhead comes in at about $21,000 a month. Annualized, that comes out to $252,000 a year, which means on $680,000 in gross revenue, Chris is looking at approximately $430,000 in net profit, as in the actual cash flow that hits his pocket. from 5 acres that he bought for $27,000. Chris isn't just building an Airbnb portfolio, he's building a commercial asset that he thinks could be worth anywhere from $5.5 to $6 million. And honestly, I think he's pretty close because the income alone doesn't tell the full story. He's got 160,000 Instagram followers, a 60,000 person email list, and 90% of his bookings are direct, meaning he's barely dependent on Airbnb at all. That's a brand, and a sophisticated buyer is gonna pay a serious premium for it. Most investors never think about this when they're starting out. They think about nightly rates and occupancy. But what you're really building, if you do it right, is a commercial asset with an exit. And that changes everything about how you make decisions along the way. So, where does Chris go from here?
I'm looking for another property to do the same thing at, different region to do the same thing in. Once I have multiple locations of the same brand, the final end goal is to sell the brand.
And the best part of all of this is that this whole play, this risk that he took on himself, allowed him to finally quit carpentry.
Now I run Evergreen and do consulting and spend a lot of time with my family and vacations.
The guy who spent 35 years building dream homes for other people, finally living his own dream. I asked Chris at the end of our conversation, if you could give advice to someone who wants to do something like this, what would you tell them?
Be authentic. Do what you would enjoy. Build something that you would enjoy. Not what makes sense financially. It's that whole, if you build it, they will come. I think the best piece of advice that a lot of people overlook because they're reading numbers, they think the end goal in life is more money. And it's not. It's more time and more enjoyment.
So there you have it. You don't need 5 cabins to start. You just need a blank canvas and the willingness to build something you actually care about. The rest? Well, Chris figured it out one cabin at a time. And if you're sitting on a piece of land or property right now, or even if you need help finding the right property, consider working with me and my team over at Host Camp. We've helped thousands of students build their dream properties and portfolios from the ground up. As a matter of fact, Chris himself is a host camper. He's been in the community now for about 3 years. So if you're interested in working hand in hand with me and my team, I'll leave a link in the description down below for you where you can book a free call with my team. And we'll see if we can help you. Spoiler alert, I think we can. And if you want to see another story of someone that went for it, then you're going to want to check out this video right here. After, of course, you like and subscribe. But then I give you the juice right here like I do every single week. Okay, see you over here.